One in five suffer.
Erase the stigma.
Brain difference is not a crime.
Mental health isn't just your problem.
It's our problem.
And now, Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave.
Welcome to Mental Health Mondays. Yes. Are we delayed? We might be a little bit delayed, but you know what, Marla, we are so glad to be here. We have guests that we've been looking forward to for quite some time. A long time. And right before we get started, I want to remind you guys to dial in text 818-698-1021 and text the word GIVE. That's text the word GIVE, G-I-V-E, to 818-698-1021. And support our Dollar Today Keeps the Stigma Away campaign. All right, like we said, we're excited about our guest today. Go ahead, Marla.
Dave, where are you, sweetie? You're everywhere.
Yes. As you can see in my background, I'm not in the studio as usual, but I'm in Taipei, and I'm locked in my room for 3 days. Yes, little violins playing. I
have a really teeny one.
That's awesome.
There you go. That's all I got for you.
But you know what? As they say, the show must go on. And thankfully, we have a great producer in studio, Tony Sweet, who's holding it and keeping things together for us. And so it is what it is. And again, we are so excited to have our guests, Wesley and Stephanie Knight. Wesley is the pastor of Revision Church in Atlanta, and Stephanie is a pediatric occupational therapist. As a bridge to mental health, specifically in the Black community, together, they are the definition of dynamic. Like most of us, they've had to deal with some dysfunction growing up, but they've subsequently dealt with it head on by using a theory called emerging emotional intelligence. If you're like us, I know you can't wait to hear all about it, so stay tuned, and after the break, we'll be speaking with the Knights.
When Dave and Marla get together, it's hot.
Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave and NAMI San Fernando Valley believe it doesn't take much to make life a little better for our neighbors, coworkers, friends, our family members, even our children who suffer with mental illness. When you support our A Dollar Today Keeps the Stigma Away campaign, you are doing your part to erase the stigma surrounding mental illness. For just $1 today, or $1 a day for 1 week, just $7, we can look forward to a future that does not include the unfortunate and uncomfortable stares, bullying, and the subsequent isolation that our loved ones who suffer with brain differences deal with. Text the word GIVE, that's G-I-V-E, to 818-698-1021 to donate. A Dollar Today Keeps the Stigma Away. Brought to you by Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave and NAMI San Fernando Valley.
All right, and just like that, we are back.
As we promised, we are super excited. Please welcome to Mental Health Mondays, Wesley and Stephanie Knight.
Absolutely. Welcome, you guys. So we've been saying, we were talking a little bit before the show started. Pastor Knight, like we said in the intro, your ministry with the Revision Church there in Atlanta is so dynamic. And I know, because we come from similar backgrounds as Seventh-day Adventists, to literally start this type of ministry and branch out on your own, that had to be a pretty big step for you guys.
Absolutely. It's been a journey, but I think that our journey of becoming healthier correlated and kind of really helped us to be able to plant this ministry, to start this ministry. So they definitely, those two paths converged.
Yeah. Wow. And it's an awesome thing. And like we said, as we were talking before the show, Stephanie, man, the way that as we're listening to your husband speak on various issues, breaking the word down, to hear your voice in the background, just signifying and just supporting, it means the world to us because it's also part of the package. So you guys are amazing.
And I have to say, for all who have been able to hear me, I have been, whether you know it or not, a trumpet cheerleader just for your ministry. The way that you both minister has just, I mean, when I say the impact, and so the first thing I have to say is, and because I don't want us to ever get caught up in feeling like that, as much as I praise you both, I thank you both. My gratitude is what you exemplify is just allowing the Lord to truly use you, like both of you. And that's the one thing that I say all the time. I see that bigger than ever, and the calling and being ordained and what's been placed on your lives. And so I just wanted to say thank you for allowing yourself use to the Spirit to be able to change lives and to be able to impart such a word. And I just know that it's Spirit-filled, because I wanted to, I'm like in the car, like just praising in my own way. I have to praise in a tofu kind of way. I'm from California, so they, I don't get the soul food out and shout out loud. I have to, do it, very, very controlled. I got a tofu praise.
So before we get too much and start the discussion, Stephanie, help us understand. It seems like an oxymoron to say pediatric occupational before we even get to the therapist. Explain that to us a little bit, please.
Okay, so occupational therapists work with the pediatric population all the way to geriatric. So the occupation of a child is to play. That's how they learn. That's how they socialize. That's how they develop fine motor, visual motor skills. And so I use the medium to play to help them develop those skills. Many of them, due to delays or deficits, they're not reaching their milestones. And so I create goals and I help them to reach that so they can be successful in all areas of their lives.
Yeah.
Now, is that an addition? I love that. Is that in addition to, like, for some kids might have to also have a different level of, like, a psychiatrist or a psychologist that you also work with as a team to help that child to develop as best they can?
Yeah. Some of my kids, they actually do have therapists, and I get a psychological usually report with their diagnoses. And then I partner with a speech and language pathologist, because oftentimes when children have some difficulty with their reaching their milestones, they usually have some speech delays sometimes as well. So, yeah.
Well, like we were saying at the beginning of the show, we come from similar backgrounds when it comes to our religious perspective and spiritual perspective. And I understand, at least for me, I can say this, that sometimes the balance there between everyday real life living and what is expected of you from a church
absolutely
perspective sometimes really crash into each other, and it doesn't really create the type of balance that we find is necessary for a well-rounded life and a successful life. Talk to us about the way you guys grew up and how that affected you and how that led you to where you are now.
Yeah. It's definitely been a journey, because as I think around in my teenage years, I started kind of questioning all of the things that I had learned before, like I think a lot of people do when they grow up in religious backgrounds. But for me, it wasn't it wasn't rebellion. For me, it was more, how does this make sense from Sunday through Friday? Like, I understand how I operate in church, but how does this make sense as it relates to issues that you might face, whether it's kind of self-actualization or self-esteem? How does this make sense in the face of racism and social injustice? How does all of this, how do I actually use this throughout the week and not just use it as inspiration for one day?
One day.
Yeah. So that's how it was for me. And so
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, so in that questioning, I think I came to a place, and there was actually a time, I was telling my wife the other day, where I was kind of thinking, like, I don't know if this particular religious lane is going to work for me, because I felt like it was kind of pie in the sky, high on theology, but not high on practicality until I met some mentors who were able to show me and to say, listen, there's a way to do this that also includes, you know, being kind of really embracing mental health and the holistic human experience.
Okay,
now
so
that,
and I know. Oh, go ahead, Marla. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, Dave, you and I both grew up Adventists. You know, a lot of people know the story. We met in second grade at Oakwood. You know, Annanite, blah blah blah. But but for me, there's so many things. Just hearing the one series, to be honest, Pastor Knight and Stephanie, that when I heard the narcissism series, it just because we're in a culture religiously that teaches by religious definition, to me, a lot of mental health suffering. I don't know how to say it any differently. We suffer through because it's not seeming to be in the manual guideline to deal with things in a certain way. And so when you spoke on it, and this is our family's experience, and to be honest, I felt like, often I tell Dave, outside of David, I feel like I'm literally the emperor in the street saying, you know, the emperor has no clothes, and I'm nude when it comes to mental health and the cries that I have. And so I'm really interested in how the two of you were able to really hone into such a connection between theology and practicality in mental health in our church, with our Black Seventh-day Adventists, to be specific.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to take that, but
that's a whammy. That's a whammy.
It is. Well, you know, I can say this in all honesty, that I suffered a lot of trauma, not only early in the family history, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but also in the denomination. So what happened was, what happens is you begin to personalize it and say something's wrong with me, because as you were saying, Marla, what's taught implicitly is that you don't trust your feelings. In fact, there are pastors who have preached, don't even think about your feelings, right? Just have faith. And I think that's a very dangerous ideology, because it teaches us to ignore a part of us that God created, which is our emotions and our feelings. So what I began to do was, rather than personalize, after I sought therapy and got some help, I realized, it's not something that's necessarily wrong with me. It's more so that there's a system that normalizes trauma.
Okay,
Yeah.
No, finish that statement, and then we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and continue that thought.
Right. So it just normalizes trauma and celebrates suffering.
All right.
That is.
We'll be right back. That's a word. We're going to come right back.
Yeah.
We'll be back. Don't move.
It's time for the Mental Health Minute with Marla and Dave.
All right, you may have heard us extol the value of talk therapy when it comes to maintaining your mental health. Many people, however, may have a difficult time understanding the difference between a psychologist and a therapist when starting their search for professional help.
A psychologist is a therapist, but every therapist isn't a psychologist. Confused? Allow us to clarify. According to BetterHelp.com, psychologists have a degree in psychology and often have taken advanced studies in the same field, including doctorate or PhD study levels. They may also research topics that interest them, along with their colleagues, or may also or as faculty for higher education facilities. Their job is to diagnose patients and clients and determine treatments based on their observations.
Therapists can encompass any number of different professions, including social work. The term therapist has often been used to encompass social workers and a variety of counselors. Because of this, they may hold a degree in various fields, including medical doctors, PhD, or a master's degree. A therapist's function is different based on their area of expertise and their level of qualifications.
There are therapists who can help you with every aspect of your mental and emotional health. If you or anyone that you know needs help, we ask always on Mental Health Mondays. If you need help finding an appropriate talk therapist, please feel free to contact us here, right here at Mental Health Mondays.
This is brought to you by Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave.
David is a thinker. I never do anything without thinking about it first.
Marla is a feeler.
I basically wear my personality on my sleeve.
But when Marla and Dave get together, it's like a match dancing with a firecracker.
Dave, this is the first time that you're so far away. I feel like that my match doesn't really do anything to the firecracker. It does nothing.
Yeah, it's
Taiwan
quite
is too
a long.
far.
It's like a 10,000-mile fuse, but that's okay.
Yeah, you went too far.
A little too far. So as we were saying, I had a similar experience, Pastor Knight and Stephanie. When I was growing up, I was young. I was interested in science, and so I would listen. And we have family worship, and we're sitting there talking, and my dad would say something. I'm like, man, I'm confused about days 1 through 3. Because you keep saying 24 hours, but the stars didn't get created, the sun's a star, until the 4th day. So you're gonna have to explain things a little differently to me because, my dad got angry one day and talking about trauma, religiously based trauma. My dad got angry that the kids, my siblings and I, were kind of frustrated at the length of family worship. And so we were trying to get back to either watching TV or doing whatever we were doing. And he was like, you know what? Just smash the TVs, threw them out. And I pretty much grew up until I got into high school with no TV. But his point was you can read anything you want to. So all I had was books. I had a library in my room and subscriptions to science magazines and stuff like that. It was the exact opposite of what I was learning in church school. And I was saying to myself, there's got to be a bridge here somewhere. And it was traumatizing to me because when I would raise a question that my parents couldn't answer, it was just be quiet.
Yeah. And
just do what I say. And you don't even try thinking about it. Just do what I say. Right. And so that was traumatic for me. It might not be traumatic for other people. And that is the thing about trauma. Trauma is an individual experience. So talk to us about, as you were growing up, as you said, you had that a spiritual trauma as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's traumatic is not just the thing that things don't add up, certain things you're taught don't add up with certain experiences you're having, but also seeing I guess we could call it duplicity, where there's a kind of public religious performance at church and in the spiritual community. And then there's all kinds of things happening in the home.
Right.
Right, that don't line up. Yeah. And it's not to say that people can't be flawed and have their issues. We all have that.
Like everyone.
For sure.
Exactly. Like anyone. But I think where the trauma comes in is where, like you were saying, Dave, there's such a high kind of value on certain spiritual things, but then there's so low value on personal relationship, on valuing people's opinions and thoughts and what they're going through, and so I think all of that kind of was pushing both Stephanie and I towards seeking we believe that our spiritual experience is not mutually exclusive from a healthy emotional experience. And I think a lot of people are forced to believe that you have to choose between.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Stephanie, is your background the same? Did you grow up Seventh-day Adventist?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I grew up in a rather conservative church that I didn't realize until later was conservative. But when I saw the duplicity within the home, the persona at church, and then the real deal at home, I knew God had to have something greater. I just said, I decided very early that my life, after I got out of the house was going to be very different. I stay or I'd stay single.
Now, what age was that? Did you start to feel that intuition that something more? There had to be something more. What age was that for you, Steph?
I mean, initially, before I became aware of it, I would say maybe 8. I would start to get certain messages, really from God, and one was very simple, like all demons don't foam at the mouth. And I remember I mentioned that to one of my parents. They were like, where did that come from? I said, from, and that was slowly God making me aware that I was in a extremely unhealthy environment. And sometimes I believe demonic presence was also there as well. And so he put within me a drive and just a fight for better and greater. And I knew it was always out there. And that was the beginning of me finding it. And so I knew I wanted to go to school. I knew I wanted to further my education. And that was for the reason where I could one day be self-sufficient, because I knew I would not do the rest of my life within that type of toxic environment. Yeah.
So now when you guys are talking, excuse me for a sec, Marla. So when you guys are talking about these experiences, take us through where that was at that time of your lives into where you started going to, and you said you experienced some therapy together that led you toward this theory. First of all, you mentioned the book Boundaries, which is an amazing book, and the workbook after it. I mean, it's one of the world's best sellers for a reason.
It is.
But you came across this theory and you started to really dig into it, the emerging intellectual intelligence.
Yeah, emerging emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence.
Yeah. So what kind of led us to that? So by that time we were married, and we went to actually a general conference session in St. Louis. That was 2005. We were about to move to California, and we were experiencing some kind of, I guess we could say, some extended family that was kind of pushing into our family culture, boundary breakers. And they had free therapy, and we'd never considered therapy. Like most people, I believe, a great majority of Christians, especially in that time, weren't even really thinking, especially Black Christians, weren't thinking about therapy at all.
The double whammy.
Right, exactly. They were just pray, just pray, that kind of thing. So they offered free therapy, and so we said, let's go try this out.
For clergy.
And,
it was, their family.
It was free therapy for clergy and their family. And I think it was your idea, actually.
I had read the brochure. I was like, we need to go there. And just think, are we crazy? Are we thinking this is acceptable behavior?
Right.
Is it wrong to want to create your own family culture? And you don't have to take everything, that's suggested, that comes from your extended family.
Right, exactly. And one of the things we walked out of that session, it wasn't long.
And we were late.
We got there late. So
we had 30 minutes.
We had 30 minutes.
An hour.
Yeah. So we got 30 minutes out of the hour. But in those 30 minutes, it really started us. It radically changed our lives. The trajectory.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because in those 30 minutes, one of the things that he said to us was, what you're feeling is not, you're not crazy. It's not strange. What you're sensing is real. And so I think he validated this emotional intelligence that was emerging. He was basically saying, pay attention to this. Because this matters. This matters for you. It matters for your kids. It matters for your ministry, and it matters for your future. And so that was the springboard.
It was like you had been given permission. It's like a permission slip to get into the validity of your emotions that had been denied spiritually. Okay, hold it again. Hold on to it. Grab it up. We'll be right back with more from Pastor Knight and Stephanie. Stephanie, before we even go, how should we call you, Wesley and Stephanie? How do we do this?
Wesley and Stephanie's fine.
Wesley and Stephanie's fine. Okay, we'll be right back with more. Go.
All right, Marla, you know, we can barely hear that music playing in the background. That's due to technical difficulties when we're all out of the studio, but there you go. That's a little pole dance that Marla does. Excuse us, Pastor Knight. But that that pole dance signifies the music.
They gave me permission. Hold on.
Oh yeah, she's gonna buck out. All right. So the music and the dancing signifies it's time for our poll question. So last week the poll question was, what is the most difficult mental illness to treat? Your options were depression, ADHD, or BPD, borderline personality disorder. Again, so the question, what is the most difficult mental illness to treat? Depression, ADHD, or BPD? Marla, do you remember if our guest got that correct?
Our guest got it correct, but what will Wesley and Stephanie do, Dave? This is the question that
Okay, before we reveal
will
the
they
answer,
get it
you
correct?
get a chance. You get a crack at it. What is the most difficult mental
now remember,
illness to treat?
No matter what happens in this question, your lights aren't going off. You're not going to lose contact spiritually.
All right.
You're going to still eat.
I think we're both on the same accord. Borderline personality disorder. That's what we believe.
You are
ding,
correct.
Ding, ding.
And so was our last guest last week. So I know you're watching. Congratulations, you did it. Okay, so this week we're going to give you a chance to answer this week's poll question, which is what percentage of teens between the ages of 13 and 18 years old experience anxiety disorders? 9.7%, 14.2%, or 25.1%?
Repeat the question for us, Marla. Repeat the question for us.
What percentage of teens between the ages of 13 and 18 years old experience anxiety disorders? 9.7%, 14.2%, and 25.1%.
What do you say? I say 25.1.
Well, you both said a lot. You said a lot,
Absolutely.
but we won't be able to tell you whether what you said matters
until next week.
Until our next episode.
All right.
Everybody, don't forget to text the word. Don't forget to text the word GIVE, GIVE, to 818-698-1021 to support our A Dollar Today takes the stigma away, or keeps the stigma away. We'll be right back. And just like that, we are back. Man, you guys have really just sort of wet the whistle a little bit and just really have us interested in what's going to happen next week. And for those of you at home, we're coming to the end of this particular episode. We're going to continue our conversation with the Knights, and you'll get a chance to hear the rest of the conversation next week. But
and please know that I have some of my own personal questions that are burning that I will be asking in the next episode. So drink plenty of water before we start our second episode, and we'll be ready to go. But in the meantime, what you guys are bringing to the table, and your insight and your experience and your spiritual journey, as God has designed it, is very insightful. And we're going to ask you to end today by giving us your best bottom line and advice based on today's conversation.
Right. Ladies first.
Well, something that just sticks with me is I learned on my journey that loving yourself is okay, and it's love your neighbor as yourself, not instead of yourself. And when I find myself in any relationship or around someone where it's difficult to love me because in loving me, they're offended or they aren't on the same page, then I realize there's someone I will love from a distance and continue to love me.
Yeah. That's great. I think for me, it's, everyone has a story and every story has trauma in it. And your story is really worth looking into. I think that's what therapy, that's part of what this emotional intelligence is looking into your story and what it's teaching you, what it's taught you, and what you can become.
One of the things that previous guests on the show, and more than just one of the guests that we've had previously on the show, have reminded us is that out of that trauma sometimes comes brain differences. That's what we like to call it here on the show. But also, depending on your perspective, that brain difference can be a hindrance, or it could also be a superpower based on, as you're framing it, that emerging emotional intelligence. It just depends on your perspective. And I guess good therapy can help guide you into that proper perspective where it becomes a superpower versus a deficit. So we're going to dive into that concept of emerging emotional intelligence on the next episode, and we're going to continue the conversation like we said. But you guys, thank you so much. This has been more than a treat. We've been looking forward to this for quite some time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
All right, so we will continue, and you guys will hear this conversation next week. Thanks for joining us here on Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave. We are honored, and thanks again to our guests, the Knights. We can't be more excited to keep this discussion going. We'll see you guys next week.